So without further ado, I'll pass over to Dr. Elaine Sisson, Senior Lecturer in Design for Stage and Screen at the Institute for Art, Design and Technology in Dún Laoghaire. And just to extend a warm welcome to Joe Vaněk for this next panel. And over to you, Elaine.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to this conversation with Joe and myself. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If you could turn off your videos and your mics, please. And if you could perhaps make available your chat function so that if you want to have comments or questions, we're going to deal with them at the end of the session. So that would be really useful if you could use those to ask Joe some questions, and we'll deal with them towards the end. So I'm very, very pleased to talk to Joe this afternoon. Joe was born and raised in England. He was headed for life in teaching before he kind of made a swerve into design, thankfully for all of us. He worked in the UK for some time before a chance meeting with Patrick Mason in 1984 proved to be kind of a highly significant turning point in his career and meant that he came to work in Ireland from that year. Joe has worked extensively all over the world. He's very connected to both the Gate and the Abbey Theatre, and we're really going to be concentrating more on the Gate today, although Joe may have plenty to say about working in other theatre spaces as well. So Joe, welcome. I just also want to say a little bit of product placement here, that in 2015, Joe published a book called Theatrescapes about his work, and many of the work that's in here is now digitized in the Hardeman Library. So it's a wonderful, wonderful archive and a really great resource. So Joe, the first question I would like to ask you really is, you have reflected elsewhere on the challenges that the Gate stage gives to a designer, that its particular kind of space and functionality is quite limited for a designer. So I wanted to ask you about the challenges of working on the Gate stage, and to talk to me about maybe some kind of innovative ways around designing, or some productions that you designed that had to kind of meet interesting design challenges for that space.
Well, Elaine, certainly, one of the main things about the Gate is it's an incredibly shallow stage, very shallow stage, very wide and very shallow, and it has two proscenium arches. The second one, which is a smaller inner one, are you hearing this?
Yes, yeah.
This inner one has an iron behind its safety curtain, and unfortunately where the safety curtain falls, it cuts exactly across the most powerful bit of the stage, which means it limits the amount of scenery or furniture. Anything can be put there, but it has to be struck very quickly. Other problems with the stage, of course, is there's no wing space, there's very little storage. So you have to be very clever or smart on whatever you're going to put on the stage. A lot of the time you have to set it into a tight kind of space to give yourself more outside space if you want to bring things in like trucks or other elements, scenic elements. So sometimes it forces you to create a space which is smaller than you probably want if you want it to be versatile and change. And of course, there's no fly tower, so nothing can be dropped from above. It can be suspended but hidden, but the depth is very limited. So in every way, it's challenging. And certainly I would say the two most challenging productions that I've done there over the years, one was The Recruiting Officer by Farquhar, which of course takes place in Shrewsbury, outside Shrewsbury by the river, all over the place. And the play was so big, we just said to Michael Colgan, we have to get off the stage and get into the auditorium. So of course we took half the seats out, clad the walls in great drop cloths of landscapes from the period, and played all the major street scenes and outside door scenes around the audience sitting on benches. So that was one decision.
Work, Joe? I mean, do you feel that it worked from, I mean,
yes, the audience was ecstatic. It was very exciting, very exciting. I mean, the Gate's done it subsequently a few times. The last Christmas Carol, I believe they had a platform ramp kind of coming out from the main stage, and obviously with the Great Gatsby, they reversed the whole auditorium, took all the seats out. So, you know, once you've got the wherewithal and you've got the nerve to do it, it can work. Otherwise, another set I designed was a Neil Aboot play for The Shape of Things, which is an American play. Cillian Murphy was in it, and it's about, we set it in an art gallery. He's a garden art gallery, who a woman fancies, and she transforms him completely as an art project and destroys him. We left it in the gallery because in trying to adapt the space to all the many locations, it was impossible. So we had a lot of unit sections of boxes and low walls and things that we pulled out. Everything was white, so it looked like a spectral gallery, and everything came out and formed the other locations within the internal space. And then we used projections to give more locational information. So that was the solution to a tricky play that we couldn't keep on changing location. So that was the solution.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of designing, say designing a more conventional set, for example, or designing more kind of abstract conceptual space, which would be your preference? Do you like the challenge?
Conceptual.
Yeah, and I mean, can you give me an example of something that you worked on that you felt that you came up with a really interesting design solution for a conceptual piece?
I think The Speckled People.
Okay.
By Hugo Hamilton. We created the world of what age he was. He was between 8 and 11-year-old boy, caught between his parents, father, a Republican, insisting on Irish, spoken only German, mother, no English. And this child was stranded between them. And we decided to locate his world or the world that they all inhabited in a visual look that would be from the child's view. And that was a very abstract space as well, that we use very little in the way of locational detail in it. It was a big space with just furniture and objects in it that we moved around.
And tell me, that was the design where you used child's drawings on the wall?
That's right.
Yeah. Indicate the child's point. So how did that come about? How did you think about that?
Because there was a photograph in Hugo's archive from his house with him and his brother against a blackboard with all these childish scribbles on, and Patrick and I looked at it and said, "Yeah, this is the key to the work. This is the big picture." I was going to say, when Patrick and I work together, we always look for the big picture, the one, if you like, the token element that informs the entire production. And in a sense, that was that. It was the blackboard that we took the idea of the child's drawing. Then I researched children's drawings. I looked at photographs of children's drawings from Srebrenica during the Balkan upheavals in the 1990s, and children's reactions to war, which we used on some downstage walls, because the play flipped back to the Second World War as well, about the mother's history. And then the rest of the set was the boy's take on the seaside town he lived in, seen through his eyes.
So, I mean, you mentioned Hugo Hamilton there, and, you know, I'm just wondering about the challenges of working with somebody, a writer who's still alive. And I know that your work has been very, very connected to the work of Brian Friel.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask you about the challenges of working with a writer who's in the room. And I particularly wanted to ask you about the challenges of working with Brian Friel, because I also know that you designed a set that Brian also directed.
Yes,
so,
Molly Sweeney.
Yeah, Molly Sweeney. So, I mean, I know your connection to Brian is kind of legendary, Dancing at Lunasa, etc. So, I mean, maybe you could talk to us a little bit about Friel in particular, and then the challenges of working with the writer.
I mean, Friel, Brian, let me put it this way. Brian, throughout all the time I worked with him, was an absolute gentleman. He was so charming. He was so gentle, and he was ultimately persuasive. No, he could be persuaded. And every production I worked on of his, I came up with a solution which really wasn't quite what he was expecting, what he'd seen in his head and what he'd put on the page. For instance, Molly Sweeney, he imagined it really as a black world with 3 actors sitting on stools, basically with spotlights on them, almost like a television, early television days. And I turned it into a multicolored world that reflected what Molly was experiencing. As a
Molly is blind,
because she was blind, and the description of how she feels when she first sees color and movement, I said to Brian, I think we need to reference this simultaneously. I still respected the black world as the forefront of the set, but then behind it was this big cyclorama explosion of colors and flowers and things that she couldn't cope with, and it was there all the time. And he was always very performances, without going into detail. I completely reversed the idea of how he wanted it represented by the mere fact that I went to the house in Brno where Janáček, the Czech composer, lived, found it was a museum, and the house he wanted depicted from the 1920s, I used the museum as the idea, because it had Janáček coming back from the past into his old haunt, and it was now he was haunting the new museum. And Brian was very happy to go along with that. I mean, I'd done all my research, presented everything to him, and he was very...
So, I mean, what do you think, the relationship between the writer and the designer and I want to talk to you about working with directors as well in a moment, but I'm just curious about what is the relationship between, is it a symbiotic relationship? I mean, is it a collaboration? I mean, to what extent can you challenge or overturn the ideas of a writer, or is
I certainly would say I overturned Brian's. I mean, look at Lunasa, the big picture. We took the idea of the end of the harvest and the cornfield. Okay, everybody knows there aren't great hills of corn in Donegal, but it was a symbolic image and Brian was happy to go with that. Frank McGuinness, in comparison, is much more set and much more rigid in terms of that's the world, that's the place, that's this, and
I'm thinking, I mean, I think that maybe somebody like Frank has a more kind of visual sense of the world, maybe.
Yes, he possibly because a lot of Frank's plays are very if I say biographical, a lot of the characters are based on his family. I know his mother appears in several of his plays under different guises. Then he's pretty specific about what he wants. So it's always very harmonious. I can't think of any plays of Frank's I've done where I've taken a radical another direction from what he envisaged. Innocence, no, I'm just trying to think if there's anything, but no, Brian's plays were the ones that and he was prepared and as I said, a gentleman to go along the process with me. Not that Frank would go to the same process with me, no problem, but he's always got a reason why it would be better if it's like this rather than that, this rather than that, this rather than that. So you respect.
So, without naming names, because I don't want us to be slandered here, are there writers that you've worked with before that you clashed with in terms of your vision for the play, or have you been able to come up with this
no, I can't. I'm just looking down the list. I've got a list down here. Not really. I mean, let's remember that the majority of the plays I've done at the Gate with Patrick Mason, with which we have completely our thoughts are on parallel lines. And I can't ever remember not disagreeing. I can't remember. No. I can't think of any director I've.
Well, that's probably testament to your own abilities, Joe.
I would hope so. Yeah.
People's point of view and working out kind of compromises. I mean, to what extent do you think that directors, actors, writers understand the role of the designer?
I think over the years, over the decades, it's become more of the unity of the creative team has got stronger, certainly as far as the lighting designer in conjunction with the designer, stage designer or costume designer and the director. The lighting designer and the scenic designer tend to be closely bonded, and
so
mostly directors on the whole are pretty
understand what design.
And
so maybe I can ask you about some of the key collaborations then, particularly with Patrick Mason, and you talk about there being a kind of a shared language or a shared understanding of what you both want. So, how does that develop over time, or, when working with Patrick, did you have that from the beginning, or, we had
it ready from the beginning, because when I first met Patrick, when he came into my office in Watford, when I was working at the Palace Theatre there, he'd been at Manchester University. I'd been at Manchester University doing my MA, and he arrived the following autumn to be a voice coach, and he checked on all the previous students, and then he followed my career. And that's why he was interested.
Okay.
He came to Watford and he found that I was the head of design. That's why he said, I must meet Joe. And we just kind of clicked. on the, I like with the recruiting officer, we both said to each other, it's too big for this theatre. We have to get off the stage. There was no, we seemed to agree on everything. And
so how many productions do you know, how many productions you've collaborated on offhand?
Well, 12 at the gate.
Okay.
12 at the gate over the years, and with including operas and that, nearly 30.
Wow. Okay. So that's an extensive body of collaborative work.
Yeah, massive.
The collaboration process, I mean, you just alluded to it a little bit there in terms of a team of people, like a lighting designer. And I would actually like to ask you a little bit about costume as well. I mean, how does that work? I mean, if you're given a script for something, I mean, let's talk about theatre first, and then we might talk about opera. If you're given a script for something, what's your process or what's your methodology? How do you start?
I would probably start with a lot of small scribbled sketches of what it literally is, and then look at it, and then, as I said, then with the director, look for the big picture. What's the hook? It's a terrible word. It's a publishing word. What's the hook for this production? What is the element that really strikes you most that need to be reflected? And actually, Patrick wrote a very good piece in Theatrescapes about the need for finding that overarching element in a piece that then you seize on that and develop that. For instance, in Frank McGuinness's, now this wasn't at the gate, this was at the Abbey, Dolly West Kitchen, there's a huge amount of writing about qualities of light. And mosaics in sienna and stained glass and all this, and we decided the whole production was about a quality of light radiating through surfaces and things. So, you pick up on a production, on a play's sort of most potent element, and then run with that. I'm looking down the list of everything at the gate here. Well, obviously, Peer Gynt, which I did with Patrick, was a monstrous play to do, which we knew we couldn't get off the stage from. We had to control it on the stage, which was a very specific case of bringing in a much smaller playing space, so we had plenty of space outside and around to bring things in from. And we located it in a sort of boarded enclosure with a great painted Nordic sky, as if Pierre was having all his life's adventures still in the same place and never left. It's almost like it was all in his head.
I mean, I think that's interesting because Peer Gynt was obviously one of the first.
Yes. And when Michael Colgan said to us, and now the next thing we're going to do, how about, guys, do you want to do Peer Gynt? We went, what? 5 hours long, and cast of 40 or 50, but doubling and trebling we managed,
Yeah, but done in the good old gay tradition of just don't let ambition stand in the way.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I wanted to you've talked elsewhere about the importance of lighting and the way in which lighting, as a kind of a plastic medium, can be used to create kind of mood and atmosphere and tone, and I mean, how significant, have you ever trained in lighting, or do you depend on have a lighting?
I've just, obviously I'm in on, with a lighting designer, the set is quite often evolved with the light design. For instance, Paul Keoghan, Irish lighting designer, I've worked with a lot. Paul would be there from first meetings really, and putting his oar in. I don't mean oar literally, but I mean literally. Yeah. Putting his perspective, his viewpoint on. Well, if you want to do that, I'm going to have a problem with that. If you feel you want that roof, how am I? I've written a piece that you've read in which I refer to the chicken and egg situation. It's absolutely true. The lighting designer and the designer have to look at each other and think which is the most important, which comes first. If I'm going to put a roof in, we've got to get light in somewhere. How's this got to be designed, or a ceiling, so the lighting designer can do what they have to do. So in many ways, your creativity has to go hand in glove with the lighting designer, and it's a
particular skill, certainly, and it's
working with the right sympathetic lighting designers. They can be not as sympathetic, but I've been very fortunate. The ones I've worked with, Sinead McKenna, for instance, who's at the gate, Michael Paul Keoghan, Mick Hughes, who was sadly has passed away now, but was a fantastic English lighting designer.
Yeah.
That, Patrick and I have worked with many times.
You have also designed costume, haven't you, for set and costume?
Nearly every production.
When or would the occasions, for example, be when you would have designed costume and set and not, you know, when would you bring in a separate costume designer, for example?
I mean, when I've been overstretched with work, usually, I mean, in fact, as far as gate production is concerned, Monica Frawley designed the costumes for the Threepenny Opera that we did, starred Marianne Faithfull, and she did a brilliant job and is sadly missed, of course. And Joan O'Clery worked on the Mariner costumes. There were only 4, I think, because I was doing an opera at the same time, and it was just too much. And you might think only 4 costumes, but it was still, you know, you could spend weeks just getting, and she got the look absolutely perfect, you know, because she's a brilliant costume designer. So, but I've all the gate shows. Otherwise, I've designed all the costumes as well.
No, because I didn't realize that was probably just, you know, a matter of efficiency and work commitments rather than a choice to not design.
No, I would always want to do the whole thing, because as far as I'm concerned, the actors moving through the space, what they wear, what their characters are, and the tone, the color, the texture, there's such a strong relationship. There has to be a strong relationship between that and the space that they're moving through. It has to be all sympathetic.
I suppose that brings me I know that we're coming close to out of time, but I actually wanted to ask you about the challenges or kind of innovations about designing for opera, because obviously opera is a different world as well. You're talking about performers and singers, not necessarily just actors, and you're talking about an orchestra, and you're talking about a huge kind of designed world, usually much more epic in scale. So, you know, you have designed a number of operas, haven't you, Joe?
Yes, nearly 30 again.
Wexford Festival Opera.
Yeah. The thing about plays is I would probably read the script 3 or 4 times, making notes on the script and then doing little drawings. As far as opera is concerned, I listened to it the first time and I can see the whole thing. It's just I can just see the whole thing in my head. Immediately I hear the music. Okay, I have to read the libretto and I know what the story is, but I just listen to the music over and over and over again, and gradually visual pictures and images occur to me. And you might say, well, listening to music is the same as reading the words of a script for a play, and in a way it is, but you get the libretto out of the way and you've got the plot and you listen to the music, and the music just opens up your head in different ways. I mean,
and you're talking about color, are you talking about words?
Yes, color, particularly sound, color related, is very important. But the other thing about opera is it allows you to be more abstract and more experimental. And
I just wanted to ask you then, you know, what's your favorite opera being that you designed, or what's a favorite show that you've done? We've kind of talked a little about theatre. I'm interested in opera. What would have been one of your favorite productions?
If I may intrude ever so slightly before.
Okay, we'll wrap up.
No, if this may be your final question, and then we can.
Okay, this is the final question.
Yeah, great.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Barry.
It would be Wexford Opera, and I was called, what was I called? Design Associate from 2006 to 8, and I designed 3 operas in a row, including one of the operas in the New Opera House in Wexford, and that was The Mines of Sulphur by Richard Rodney Bennett, which was a terrifying 18th century horror thriller. And it had to have a really, really realistic, creepy old house set, old house type set, and I really enjoyed it. It wasn't quite Hammer horror, but it was nearly that. But it was still abstracted enough because it was all about the plague as well, and all the walls were covered in boils and spots and things. So even though the audience looked at what they took to be a realistic old manor house interior, it was decaying in a way that reflected the plague. So that was a very exciting production to work on, where I could have the best of both worlds, actually.
Well, that sounds like a very good point to draw this to a close. The best of both worlds, the best of all worlds, Joe.
That's right.
Thank you so much for your time. I think, you know, many of us could actually just sit and listen to you talk about your stories and anecdotes and experience all day, but unfortunately we're not allowed to.
Anyway, great to talk to you, Elaine. catch up with you.
Okay,
And
thanks,
Barry.
guys.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks so much, Elaine, and to Joe. I absolutely agree. And I feel terrible breaking up the flow there. But I hope that won't be the last we'll hear from Joe in this session. But I think we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. And great to bring in some people's questions and thoughts on things so far. I just want to move on to the next component of this panel, and that is to bring on Grace Vroomen. Glad to say I was able to call Grace a colleague here at UNI Galway for a number of months when Grace was working as part of an Erasmus program to digitize Joe's archive, or to work and create one over a period of months here. And I learned a great deal from Grace over that time, and I think her work is absolutely instrumental to opening up new histories, not just about the Gate, but about Joe's work in general. And I'll talk a little bit more about the archive towards the end. But right now I might pass over to Grace, and I know who'll be able to share her insights from working on that archive and creating that exhibition. So if I could pass over to you, Grace.
Yes, thank you so much.
Grace, thank you, Grace.
I hope everyone can hear me. So I'm Grace, and I'm going to try to get my PowerPoint set up. Oh, yes, let's see. Yes, so thank you so much for the introduction, Barry. So as Barry already said, I did an internship at NUI Galway last year from September to late December, which seems like it's entirely world away now. I've been stuck behind a computer for so long. And yes, we worked together on, I suppose, curating and digitizing the Joe Vaněk Archive of Theatre and Opera Design, which was a really incredible and challenging experience, especially because it was sort of the first time I was working with archiving, and also the first time that I was working so intensely with design materials, where I'd usually been focused more on scripts. So I tried to structure this talk around 3 central questions, which were very much interconnected. But it's basically, we asked ourselves, so first of all, what do we want the framework of the archive to look like? How will we structure this? What is the intended audience of the archive? And then what will the final selection be? And for the frameworks, how would people look at it, and how do they navigate the archive? What of course seems sort of the first thing that comes to mind when you work with that material is that you want to show everything. You wish you had all the time in the world to scan everything and get it up there, but you can't, and you have to make a selection. There's only so much time and so many space that you have. And then you think, well, should I try to foreground the most thoroughly documented productions? So of course that is the those are the productions that we can give the most information on. But you have to ask yourself, if there's already loads and loads of material on these productions, and for instance the Gate Archive or the Abbey Archive, wouldn't it be better to reserve some of that space for really unique material that we have? So trying to find those really unique pieces in the material that we had was really a top priority. And then we came to structure it around these 5 keywords or topics that we thought that people were most likely to be looking for in an archive like this. And then the first one would be, so Joe's work with Brian Friel, which is also centered around plays, because a lot of those plays have really stunning locations. And I also think that we already saw in the interview that the collaboration with Friel is such a important and really unique experience that we wanted to make sure that had a good place in the archive. We looked at adaptation. We looked at Joe Vanek's work with landmark production, and a lot of those productions are also about also non-Irish plays. So how were these non-Irish plays put in an Irish context? if at all. Myths, legends, and tales was another one, and then finally opera. And here I thought I'd show some of the unique material. So you have these beautiful pictures of Friel at the rehearsals of performances at the Gate Theatre. And I thought this picture was really interesting because you can see Friel, but you can also, of course, see the set design pretty well. You have lots of these really great pictures of models for set design, which we really wanted to showcase in there as well. And here I have a picture for Speckled People, which is the one of the children's drawings that was used to create that wallpaper. And I think that's also really unique and interesting research material. So these are just some of the examples that are on the archive. Then, of course, we also wanted to think about, well, who will actually be using this? And we really came to the conclusion in the talks that we wanted to emphasize that this wasn't just for academics, but it was also something that would be really useful for theatre practitioners and contemporary, but also future academics and theatre practitioners. And that's, of course, really difficult because you'd have to kind of predict what kind of things people will be interested in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, maybe 100 years. And what I wanted to do is make sure that if someone in 50 years, 100 years looks at these materials, then they probably have a very vague understanding of what the production is. So I want to make sure that there's material in that will really give them a good starting point to discover the show. Because I think we've all been in a situation where you're looking at a production from quite a while ago and you have maybe 1 or 2 pictures of what the set looks like. And I wanted to make sure that if there were 2 pictures in this archive that people had, they would be pictures that would give them a really good head start in discovering this this production. So it is really a mix of, on one hand, documentation of the performance and its cultural significance and how it was received. So I really wanted to make sure that there were reviews in there as well, because I've always found those really helpful when looking at a production, but also lots of material on the production process, the artistic references that were being used, and certain influences on the things that might have influenced the design and inspirations. So we have documentation design sketches, reference, photographs, notes and research, correspondence if that was available and we were allowed to use it, and then documentation of the performance. So that is more the official photographs of the cast in costume, then pictures of the final stage and of the performance, posters, programs. I think programs are a really valuable resource because sometimes it's literally all you have to figure out who has been working on that production. And that seems strange to think of that because these are all quite recent productions, but that's again where I'm thinking about, okay, if someone is looking at this in 60 years, then they might not know who has worked on it, so they need a document that can show them. Interviews, which then highlight what the hopefully what the process was behind the designs, and again reviews to see how they were received and kind of get an idea of the cultural context of a performance like that. So you can't read this, unfortunately. My laptop and PowerPoint is not able to render the really high quality pictures that are on that are in the archive, but I still wanted to use this document because it shows because it's something I really found really interesting, because it showcased how the process basically evolves. So you start with this very neat type list, and then there's loads and loads of notes and corrections and stuff in there, which I think is really interesting. So that is a list for the set and design materials of Skylight. And on the other hand, we have these really beautiful pictures of a caravan that was one of the references for By the Book of Cats. So I thought that would be really interesting to put that in there as well. Then you end up with loads and loads of unique material and loads of reviews and interviews and wonderful pictures and designs and notes. And then you still have to make a final selection, because that's so much material that you just aren't going to be able to digitize all of that. And again, that's where I try to look at, well, what image, what materials are really representative of the production. If someone only has that picture, only has that note, will that help them along in their research? And also, you kind of have to develop a feeling for the material, which you do if you work with it as intensely as I did, and try to figure out what would be really representative, even if it's not necessarily obvious when you look at it the first time. And I thought this was a really good example of that, where we had loads of pictures of Dublin and other urban cityscapes, which were used as references for the design of Dubliners. And I think this is a really good example, because you can see the arch and how that in the picture, and how that is used in the model box here. I think this really shows how this can seem like quite an inconspicuous picture when you look at it in this gigantic folder with loads of pictures of streets and bridges and stuff. But then if you hold them up to the final design, you start to figure out, okay, what is really important, what is really representative, and you want to make sure that that is included as well. I'm not sure if I've really rushed through it or I was really slow. But in any case, that was kind of my really quick overview of the things that largely informed our final selection. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Grace, and well done. That's an incredible feat to summarize in that short space of time all the work you did. And I think it's fitting to pay tribute to that here now as well. I mean, the plan was when you were coming to work on the archives that of the archive would be digitized, and I don't think we could get a handle on how much we would get done or how much you would get done, but the volume you did was phenomenal. And the digital exhibition that will be launched shortly, I think has close to 300 images from Joe's archive, fully available and contextualized, and with great essays which you contributed as well. And that'll be a fully open access resource which will be making available to all very shortly. I'm going to put a link into the chat here to the catalogue of Joe's archive. So you won't be able to see, just to tantalize you a little bit further, you won't be able to see the items, but it'll give you a full listing of everything that's there. Again, while I'm putting that in, if people want to begin maybe putting some questions into the chat, and I can moderate those and put those to Joe or Grace, as that may be. So I've just put in that link there now to the Vaněk Archive catalogue. There's one question in already from Marianne Kennedy. So I might put that first of all. Marianne Caneda, it comes up Osperla here in the chat. Marianne, apologies. So you can just, Marianne, thanks Joe and Elaine. But she adds, she'd love to hear more about the sound related color in relation to set design. So Joe, if I could maybe invite you back on to turn on your sound and turn on your video. Put some of these questions to you. Great, I think you're no stream. You're back on sound, absolutely.
What am I clicking?
So you might see yeah, there you go.
I can see you now, Joe.
Again. So just to recap there, Joe, a question was about, I think, a comment you made about sound related color in relation to set design. Is there anything you'd like to pick up on that again or respond to about that comment about sound, color, and design?
I think probably going back to going back to the Mines of Sulphur and the whole fact that the opera is about the plague. There's a lot of grumbling, rumbling, very dark, very low sound in the orchestra, which kind of informed the fact that this interior had to be obviously dark and gloomy, but the music just does it for you, and the tones. I did it basically in sepia and a kind of rancid green, which is symptomatic of some of the plague elements, and red because of blood and all. So I mean, you know, you've got the sound, you've got the plot, you've got, you know, a lot of the time you listen to it and it just tells you what, you know, what colors to use. And that would be a good one. Another one I did in Wexford was the Rusalka by Dvorak, which is a fantastic romantic opera about the mermaid who basically wants to become a human and falls in love with the prince and gets legs, and it all turns horrible. But it's a romantic fairy story, and the music is very light, very ethereal, and the whole thing was in pastels, and the whole design was a pastely world. I mean, the music sounded pastely, so it was very pale greens, pale lilacs, and also the lights. That's where lighting came in and changed the set continually with different tones of these soft pastel colors. But the music just said pastel when you listen to it. It couldn't be anything other than that. So
and Joe, could I ask you just a follow-up question on that? So when you hear that and you see and feel the colors, do you start to sketch it, or do you kind of storyboard, or how do you work from that moment?
I mean, I would storyboard everything, but I might do color washes of just one color into another, just on a large sheet of art, watercolor paper or something, just thinking how one color might blend into another and how lighting might affect things,
Okay, thanks. Sorry,
Yeah.
I stepped in there.
Absolutely, Elaine, no problem. And again, there was a comment there from Stephen in the chat about that process, Joe. The synesthesia, is that how you describe that process of working with color? Is that our...
Yeah, this is yes.
Yeah.
I've only come across that word a few weeks ago, actually, and I don't think I have it within me. I forced it on me, but I don't have it naturally within me. But it's but I do listen to a lot of music, and I can imagine a musical world in the abstract, which gives me colors, But I think most people will be the same listening to a symphony or something, or another piece of music. You get the same feeling. Unless I'm wrong.
Sure. Okay, and there's another question here from Morag Dine. Again, adding thanks to Joe, Elaine, and Grace. And the question is about how do you see the world of design changing in this era of the pandemic? And wondering if theatre design will become a maximalist in response to inability to experience live theatre. And do you think design will be influenced by this current situation we find ourselves in?
Well, I wonder what the word maximalist. I wonder what that.
Well, once it's all over, I think is the expanse. It's really about how will design maybe change going forward if we're not able to be in the theatre together.
I think it'll rely much more on technology. It'll rely. Interesting enough, Irish National Opera did a very interesting project just before Christmas. It's 20 short operas, and it was all filmed on stage at the Gaiety Theatre, basically in a black box with projections, images, and props, and with the minimum of staff, minimum of people, minimum of singers, minimum of orchestra. And it was every production, there's 20 different operas. It's really worth watching. And you can see how a complete world is created with far less. And I think that's what's going to happen. People are going to have to be more resourceful in creating these worlds without big, complex scenic elements. They're going to take a lot of people a lot of time to put together as they have in the past, all working together. People have to be kept in separate spaces. Please God, it isn't going to happen. I think people will have to think about more elemental approaches to design, taking the elements and creating a world with less, creating a big world but with less elements, and being clever about it. So I would recommend anybody who hasn't seen these 20 shots at opera, I think it's called, you should get on the website and watch them and just see how it was done at the Gaiety. That might be the way forward.
Great, thanks, Joe. Another question here from Aideen Howard, who adds, how wonderful it is to see this material being digitized and made available. And this question is for Grace in particular. If Grace had some insights into some of the challenges you might have experienced with working on and digitizing visual and textual material with the archive of a set designer.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's hard to describe because, of course, that's kind of the point. It's a feeling that you develop. But I would say it's mostly just poring over the material that you have over and over again, and trying to indeed find the way that, like I said, the curve of the arch is very similar to what you see in the set design. And I would look at, for instance, if it was pictures of clothing, like if I could find that the patterns were used in the final design. And Joe was very helpful in usually writing notes next to things that will make it a lot easier to see if they were in the running for being a sort of a final selection. But it is really difficult, and sometimes you just have to make a decision based on your gut feeling, and very rarely that would come to me saying, well, I think this is the prettiest, so I'm going to scan this one, because you just have to make a decision at some point.
Great. Okay. There's a follow-up question for you, Grace, from Rude. I won't attempt to pronounce this very Dutch word, I'm assuming, in the middle of the comment.
That's a German.
German word, yeah. So you can see that question there, maybe yourself, Grace, but if you had some comments or thoughts in response to Rude's question, which I think is about the structure of the archive again, and how you responded to some of the choices that were made in terms of what was digitized.
Yes, I think we had quite a few meetings about how we wanted to structure the archive and what we wanted to include in that or didn't. And like I said before, it's a combination of a lot of things, because sometimes you feel like I felt like I struck gold, because I would find a whole box dedicated to production that had so many interesting things, and then Barry would tell me, this is great, but half of this is already on the Gate archive, of half of this is already on the Abbey archive. And then I think, okay, back to the drawing board. So I had a lot of conversations like that. And I think eventually we really tried to focus on, just in a broad sense, what would be the themes that people would be looking for when they use the archive. So we landed on topics like landscape and adaptation and transnationalism, which we try to kind of put underneath landmark productions. And yeah, you have to develop a Fingerspitzengefühl, which is a German word, which I'm probably also mispronouncing, for what you think will work. I hope that kind of answers it.
Thanks, Grace. Another question here from Ian Walsh, that to direct this to Joe. And it was specifically about maybe some design or artistic inspirations or heroes you may have had, or any productions that you may have seen that had a direct influence or impact on your own style and your own work.
It would be probably the Czech designer Joseph Svoboda, and also John Berry. I was brought up just outside Stratford-on-Avon in the United Kingdom, and went to the Royal Shakespeare Company a lot in the 80s and saw a lot of John Berry's work, and also went to Prague and for the PQ, the big international theatre design exhibition every 4 years, and came across Svoboda's work and was very impressed by the monumentality and abstraction that both Svoboda and Berry created, and they went for the big pictures as well. They went, and I think that very much in, I'm not a great one on small detail. I enjoy a big canvas into which smaller elements are dropped, and that was their kind of approach, and that kind of influenced me. So those are the two named designers I would definitely claim as a kind of influence.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Joe. I think maybe one new. Yes, so thank you from Ian. A comment just in response to an earlier question was from Marianne Canada, again, colleague here at NUI Galway, and it was just to say thanks for your answer, Joe, to the question earlier. But just to say, and this is Marianne, just to say that we have used NUIG archives and Joe's designs in teaching stagecraft, costume and set. And thanks for giving us a beautiful body of work that's already of benefit to students, academics and theatre goers alike. And it's wonderful to hear that tribute and that testament to the value of these archives that go back into students' hands, to researchers' hands, to theatre makers' hands, and that really do inspire a lot of great work. And it's wonderful to see that. So thanks, Marianne. There might be time for one more question before we break. I think they're in now. This is from Afka to Grace. Again, thanks to Grace for her talk. And she was wondering if there's anything you hope or feel that future scholars or theatre practitioners will take away from the archive, or what do you think they might take away most from it?
I would say for scholars, I would hope that what I find really enlightening from working with this material is indeed how much collaboration there is between all these different actors behind the scene. And I think definitely what I am guilty of as an academic is that I would look at the script and then at basically the review of production and then think to myself, now I've got a really good idea of what this production was like, when you haven't even looked at lighting or really looked at the design and all these other things that come together in a production. And I think the archive highlights that really well, how much that all actually depends on each other. So I would say that for scholars. And for theatre practitioners, if I could answer in a very personal way, I think I found it really reassuring that even when it's such a big professional production, I could see that some of the costumes were thrifted and some of the furniture was thrifted and redesigned for the stage, and that kind of reassured me, okay, it's fine if you don't have a gigantic budget, you can still really make it work and make it look professional. And apart from that, I think it gives a really good overview of the research process that goes into designing a production, which is I think really helpful for both scholars and practitioners. So I hope that answers your question.
Good.
Just before we finish up, just one last comment in here from Andre Pilney to Joe, just to say there's a huge Svoboda, if I'm saying that, but I'm not. Svoboda exhibition at the Gas Gallery, but it's obviously closed right now. But at least Andre advises us there's a few pictures of it up online, and of course I'll reiterate Andre's comments and thanks to Joe. Perhaps finally, just to wrap up and just to add a few further thank yous. I think the most important thank you of all is to just formally thank Joe, first of all, for his generosity and his vision in depositing his archive with us in NUI Galway. And it's something we're very, very privileged to hold. I had an amazing few months working on that archive, cataloguing it, and in conversation with Joe. And every conversation with Joe just enlightened so much more about the archive. But that just is being made so much more visual and fully accessible now thanks to Grace's work. And it'll be very exciting to share all that with everyone, open access online shortly. Again, it was all down to Joe's generosity, not just in giving it to us, but to allow us to digitize it and to make it available. And at tomorrow's session, where there'll be conversations about what more work can come from this network, I think Joe's papers are such an amazing place to start and to kickstart some new conversations about design and the history of design at the Gate, and in more broader conversations within Ireland and within Europe as well. Just as a few other thank yous, on the topic of the digital exhibition, there's great support in-house at the digital publishing team at the library. I think it's really important just to acknowledge Dr. Killian Joy, Aisling Keane and Evan Joyce, who did sterling work on building the website that hosts that exhibition and which we'll be able to share very shortly. A sincere thanks to Dr. Elaine Sisson as well for so expertly moderating today's session, and again all her generous time in the lead up to today as well, and having everything run so smoothly. We're just about up to time now. There is another session in the afternoon, which will be a panel discussion about moral-averity, which will be beginning at 3 o'clock. And I know it'll be really worth coming back and tuning into that for the afternoon and indeed for the rest of this conference duration tomorrow. So a final thanks to everyone involved in this panel, to Elaine, to Grace, and in particular to Joe Vaněk. So thanks everyone very much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Barry, thank you, Joe.